I've always thought it was very important for big movements like Ancapism to be self-aware, to have some sort of goal structure in mind. We do, in a way, have some sort of goals. We have the three important ones: a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term goal. Things like the Free State Project might be a short-term goal measured in years or decades. Seasteading, definitely measured in decades. And then a more long-term goal like the end of the state or the establishment of a true Ancap community. A land-based one. Now, these are all well and good, but they're not enough because it's very dangerous to assume things. It's very dangerous to assume that we are on the right path if we don't think about what's on the path in front of us. You absolutely must read this book called True Believer by Eric Hoffer. It will change your viewpoint and your life. It will change the way you think about any sort of organization you're involved in or any belief system you may have in a good way, in a way that makes you think. And I think that we need to start thinking. Not that we haven't before, but that we need to do more thinking about where we're actually going in the really long term. So what are we missing? It is the true long-term goal. So think of an Olympic athlete who's just won their gold medal. That's the thing they've been striving for several years of their life, for a very long time. And they've got this gold medal, and then what do they do with it? What's next? What comes after the gold medal? We don't know. We don't talk about that. Our gold medal, of course, is the end of the state, but then what? What do we do? It's not the end of all human achievements. What happens after the fall of the state? Not 5 years from then. 5 years won't be much different. How about 100 years, 300 years, 500, 1,000? What sort of establishment are we setting up for the future of the human race when we're totally different? Totally different. Culturally, technologically, economically, everything. Have we prepared ourselves? I don't know. We don't know. We don't talk about it. For example, what happens when the tech revolution truly hits? We have computers now. We have some automated things. We have a much higher efficiency in many of our jobs. And that kind of is changing because of our technological advancements. What happens when those advancements become so vast and world-changing that we don't need most of our jobs anymore? We don't need the labor jobs, the farmers, the construction workers, the firemen. What happens when we don't need the state-based jobs, like the soldiers and the paper pushers and the lobbyists and all of the jobs that support them, all the people who build the buildings that they do their business in, and who clean the buildings they do their business in, and who run electricity to the buildings they do their business in? What do we do then? It's a totally different landscape. And how does anarcho-capitalism mesh with that? Because we're trying to create this not utopia, but this better system. But think about how much effort we're putting into this idea. Think about the vast amount of multiple lifetimes, perhaps, of effort. And we might only have it for a blink of an eye before it's overtaken by this robotic economy. Is that acceptable to us, to spend this much time on something only to find out it wasn't really worth it? It was just going to happen anyway? So with things like that sort of technological advancement, or like techno-Marxism, I'm going to talk about that in another video. We really need to consider how it meshes in the end with anarcho-capitalism. Because if we're successful, there's going to be more than just our set of ideas which has been put into it. And for example, there's a lot of, probably the best one I could think of is basic income. If you have robots who are doing all the labor jobs, it doesn't actually violate anyone's rights to give people basic income. It violates nothing. There's no free will. They're robots. But we don't talk about that. What happens, is another example, when we start planet hopping? How do we interact with each other? How do we change our economy and our civilization from one planet to 2 planets to 5 planets to however many is actually physically possible? We don't even know yet. How do we create shipping between the two? How do we create communication between the two? How do we negotiate with each other without a government? It's very difficult. If you look at Star Trek or Star Wars, they didn't have stateless societies. It was much too complicated. Not that it's impossible, but there's no idea in the literature about these things. No one has come up with it. And we have to think about that. And it might seem far-fetched, but it's a very serious question. Because if we create a system that doesn't prepare the future generations any better than the monarchy was good for the generations in that system, or the Democrats, not the party, but people who are democratic, who support democracy, or how the Democrats supported future generations. If we don't do a better job than they did, how can we say that we're any better than they are? And it becomes that question: either you die the hero, or you live long enough to become the villain. So we have to think real hard about what we're doing to make sure that there is less of a chance we become a villain, or we have unintended consequences. And again, going back to the Star Wars thing, what if we aren't alone, or what if there is some sort of danger to the species as a whole? A pandemic, a asteroid, or actual aliens or something like that. What do we do? How does a stateless society organize and react quickly enough to deal with a threat like that? Especially if it's a violent threat. We're non-violent. How does the NAP handle a bunch of bloodthirsty aliens? And that sounds far-fetched, and it is far-fetched. But again, there are situations in which it applies. What if there is a planetary issue? What if we start running out of some very important resource? Someday we're going to start running out of helium. Someday we're going to start running out of, I don't know, oil and fossil fuels. And in that case, how do we power things like rockets? We can power cars with renewable energy, but we can't power rockets. How do we get into space? Mars doesn't have fossil fuels. The asteroid belt doesn't have fossil fuels. You can't mine them. How do we deal with that? We have to be sure that we aren't backing ourselves into a corner. Because a change this big, like the one we're proposing, is dangerous simply by instability. So we have to make sure we're making the right changes. We have to make sure we're doing the right thing. And we can't just say that we are and leave it at that. Because after all, how many statists are convinced of their own morality when they haven't done any thinking at all? Well, to that I say, let's get thinking.